Good morning. Hi, George. How are you doing?
Great, Megan. How are you today?
I'm good. Matt, how are you doing?
I am doing quite well. How are you?
I'm good. It's a beautiful day, and I'm really, really happy to, I always love being on the Thursday live stream. It's just my favorite way to start a Thursday.
The Thursday
Um,
live stream is completely different from the Tuesday live stream, which does not exist.
doesn't exist.
Correct.
It's why Tuesday feels bad, honestly.
Exactly.
And I wasn't here last week, but I watched the stream last week, and you guys, it was so interesting. And you discussed typography last week, if that's correct. And we spent last week talking about that and the early origins, common terms, and some basic font anatomy. Now, today we're going to keep talking about typography for the web. Excuse me, we're going to talk about typography for the web, which is the distinction from what what we talked about last week.
Right.
And we're going to cover how to make fonts available for use and how we use cascading style sheets to stylize text used on the web. This is all very interesting.
Those are all also notes I went completely off the rails on, so we can just jump in.
No,
Exactly.
sorry about that. I know that Matt, I know that this is your specialty, so I was like, I'm trying to be like really true to it, and then I was like, oh boy, oh sorry. But all right, let's answer the question though. Matt, why are we dedicating a whole episode to typography for the web?
I think to start with, it's a nice change of pace from some of the topics that are a little bit more on mission that we cover, but these are things that a lot of the types of businesses that we work with deal with on a daily basis. And I think it's nice to be able to show that we understand and we can relate in ways outside of the typical gamut of IT support services.
Right. It's a little less doom and gloom too than maybe some of our cybersecurity focused stuff. It's a little more, this is something interesting and almost artistic about the web that we can.
Yeah, I mean, look, technology solves problems. Technology allows us to be creative and communicate in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. And sometimes it's nice to look at some of those aspects of the technologies that we come in touch with every single day. And hey, fonts and typefaces are important to how we take in information.
Yeah.
And what is the number one medium for us taking information in these days? The web, right?
Yeah.
When's the last time you saw a copy of the Yellow Pages that wasn't in web form?
It's been a while.
I actually think before I met you, I actually do think I underestimated how much font types and typography actually like affect me and how I interact with them. And then I think working closely with you in marketing, I was like, this is very significant. Even for Valiant, having a style, having a brand, our font is a huge part of that in our.
Yeah, it reflects our personality and how we communicate with people and how we solve problems. And now that we've talked about our services to an extent, let's jump back into fonts for the web.
Yes.
The reason we split this out because traditionally typography and typesetting is something that happens in a more tangible setting. We're working with print, and the dimensions you're working with are fairly fixed. You've got sheets of paper that are a certain size and other things, whereas with technology, it's all different. We're all working on different screens right now with completely different resolutions. Some of us might be looking at this from a mobile phone as we're waiting for the train or something. And because of that variety in how information's presented, you handle fonts for the web differently than you would in other mediums. And this was also a great excuse to just kind of like make a really neat on-screen demo. So I think that also helped us help motivate this episode as well. So let's just jump into some of the things that we use from cascading style sheets, which I'll explain a little bit more later. It's just how you style text and other elements on the web. Let's go into how some of the basics of how we get things to look the way we want.
Right.
All right, here we go. Add to stream. Hey, look at that. That is a
classic.
very, very classic piece of text. I feel good about it because my name's in it, so it's like. But the reason that we see this phrase used so much is because of the diversity of the letters. If you recall from last week, we talked about ascenders and descenders and arms and shoulders and all these other parts of a font that make up the way it looks. And this phrase just happens to have a really great variety of everything. So when you're evaluating a font or doing something, this is a great phrase to use. So one of the first things that make the most sense when it comes to setting a font is its size. You want it to be readable, right? If it's not readable, what's the point? There is none. Hey, George, can I get like a snare drum and some cymbals for my punchline? Well, that wasn't even a joke. That was more of a proactive question.
Don't forget to tip your waitress.
Anyway, all right, so we've got this phrase here, and if you see on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got a couple of controls that are for different areas that we're going to look at, and font size is important, and it's interesting, you know, there are a lot of different types of measurements that can be applied to a font to determine its size. There are terms like medium and small and large, but when you think about it, what do those mean? They're relative, but what are they relative to? We don't know, and that, to me, makes them a very poor choice when it comes to doing something like assigning a size. What we use instead are REMs or root element, root element sizing. And the beauty of that is that it allows us to use values that are relative, but they're always going to be relative to the root of the website, web page itself, the body tag, the most, you know, like penultimate tag in a page's makeup. And the beauty of it being relative is that it allows us to make adjustments to size of not just one area of text on the screen, but the entire screen itself. And that's perfect for responsive design when you don't know exactly what kind of device is going to be used to view your content. So if we go over here, we can see font size changing. And what I did on the right-hand side was do the conversion between REMs to pixels, pixels being a much more common kind of unit of measure. And if we take our size down to 1 REM, you'll see that that's the equivalent of 16 pixels. That is the absolute value that all the relative values we used are based upon. So if I were to set that base value to say like 8 pixels instead of 16, and we put something at 2 REM, it would then become 16 pixels, or rather 8 pixels instead of 16. That was a lot of talking for something that just says the bigger number, the bigger.
But I think the important part is it's like you're fixing an absolute value.
You're anchoring with an
anchoring it. Right, because it's kind of floating in time and space there on a web page.
Exactly, and when you have something that doesn't have when you're working with a relative value that doesn't have something that's obviously anchored to, it makes it really difficult to control what you want. And I think that one of the biggest pitfalls of it is that you start to lose consistency. And when you lose consistency in something like font size, it makes it very difficult to read text. And if you've got important information and you're doing that, it's not going to be read.
Also, I think it would be a good web page or a good piece of content, unprofessional or sloppy, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And some of the other stuff that we're going to look at here in 1 second. Oh, hold on a second. We have a comedian.
We have a genius right here. Wow.
Stefan has not forgotten to tip his waitress.
After he made that joke, I'm just going to go back to his previous comment. So, all right, that's font size. Now, font size is fairly self-explanatory, so we won't go into that any further. Last week, we talked a little about kerning. If you guys remember that was related to the spacing between letters, and that plays a very large role in legibility. It plays a role in how we can take information in. And kerning doesn't really work on the web. There are CSS attributes that are for kerning. The problem is that the fonts you're using have to have kerning data included in them. And if they don't, nothing happens. And for that reason, and there are definitely people out there who would disagree, I just ignore kerning on the whole. And what we use in place of it is letter spacing, which is not terribly different, although it's more uniform, whereas kerning is going to vary a little bit based on that data that's in the font. So right now in this demo, we have letter spacing set to 0, but if we make it a little small or go into a negative value, you'll see letters start coming together to the point where things become claustrophobic. You can't read that. No one wants to read that. And if you go too far, we already know what it says, so it's easy for us. But if you were to just look at that without realizing, it would take a few seconds to be able to figure out.
You would even think they weren't even the same words.
It's just jumbled.
And you lose clarity. It's like an interesting experiment of like losing quick clarity. Yeah.
So let's bring that back down to 0 for now. And all of a sudden, wow, that's readable again. It's actually something to be able to see the change in real time right here. And our options here are a little bit limited, but you can easily build text that's attractive. And we'll do a Valiant example when we go through all of these to kind of show how the type is set on our website, which is a really cool real world kind of demo. Now, font style is the next thing we're going to go into, and we talked a little bit about that last week, with there being a typeface and each variation really being a font, italic, bold, so on and so forth. And in this case, we've got things a little different. So we're going to start with our normal font style here, and we'll move over to italics. Nothing terribly surprising here. It's pretty much what we would look at if we were, say, working in Microsoft Word or another piece of software. We also have oblique. And you'll notice that when I go from italic to oblique, nothing really changes here.
Right.
That's because of maybe I'd call it a technicality. I don't really know what I would call it now that I'm talking about it out loud. But typically, italicized text is a font on its own, right. Whereas text that's oblique is your regular normal font that's just kind of leaning a little bit,
like tilted.
Yeah, it's not a font that was specifically designed to look that way. It's kind of like the shortcut to be able to emulate italicized text.
Right.
So italics tend to be their own font. Oblique is a modification of the normal font. And that's why we don't really see anything different happening between italic and oblique, because the browser's just like, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to show you italics.
Right.
Now, we talked about normal text, italics, and oblique, but we didn't mention bold. And that's because that's not actually a font style, but the weight of the font. And probably my favorite part of this demo, it's just the one that jumps out the most. Font weight is controlled using different terms, sort of like we were talking about with font size, but most people will defer to numbers. And those numbers range from 100 to 900 in 100 increments, so 100, 200, 300, 400, so on and so forth. And if we go from 400, which is considered to be the normal weight, and go all the way down to 100, you'll see there's a significant difference in the way it looks. We use different font weights to express things like priority or to emphasize an area of text. And fonts that have a significant number of different weights can be a lot of fun to work with, but then you also have to realize that you need to use a certain level of restraint so you don't go too crazy. I think we've all seen like a Word document where certain words are bolded, some of them are underlined, some of them have strike through, some of them are in colors.
Right.
You kind of don't understand priority when that happens, because you don't know which is more important than the other. You just know everything looks a little different. And for that reason, we only stick to a couple of different weights at Valiant. We use 400 for our normal text, and we use 600 as our bolded text, and we keep it as simple as that. Now, of course, we could continue with that weight, but at some point it just becomes a little excessive, at least for our needs. Although that does look pretty cool there. But again, it has the word Fox in it, so
it could not be cool.
It's amazing. Anyway,
it is a great one.
And the final line height is one that's always kind of interesting and makes a gigantic difference in readability, and we'll do that with the demo so that can make more sense to everyone. Line height is simply the height of the amount of space taken up for a single line of text. And my personal preference for this is typically using a percentage value because it's relative to the font size. So here we're using a line height of 135%. So the amount of space being taken up by any line of text right now is 135% of the total height of the font. And we'll bring that down to 100 to show what it looks like by default. Right. Having looked at it at 135 for the past 15 minutes, now we're looking at it at 100%. It looks a little too close to itself.
Yeah.
Right.
A little more confident. You want a little breathing room. You want to have a little space for your eyes to be able to get through this text easily. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you take your line height down to 0, you don't see anything. And if you go too far, it's just going to look disconnected. Those look like 3 different phrases on 3 different lines, as opposed to 1 line of text over 3 lines. Now, when it comes to Valiant, let's just guys, give me a phrase or something that we would have on the website.
Oh, man.
I could see what my little tagline is.
Go for it.
Well, I always say we focus on your IT so you can focus on your business. That might be too long though.
Oh, I already had something up that I thought was
Good.
fairly.
I like that one, man.
That's a good one, right? All right. So like for Valiant, let's say this was like a heading on the website, right? Like on the homepage or something. We would go with a font style of normal. Our font weight would be 600. Our letter spacing is typically about -3 pixels. I only have this set up for every 5, so I'll turn it into -5. And our line height's 135. That's exactly what you would see when you go to our website. Hopefully with more awards underneath than you would see here, because we have them.
We have so many, yeah.
Too many. Never can have too many. But so that's just kind of like a quick review of some of the most important attributes that you would use in styling type for the web. The one thing that I kind of skipped over without realizing it was the all-important font family. This is kind of cool. Let's say you're authoring a document in Microsoft Word, and you can choose from the fonts that you want to use. You can only really choose one at a time. But for the web, because there is no guarantee that the fonts are going to be available on a computer that is being used to browse whatever it is that you've created, we have things called font stacks. Now, I do know that we've talked about our tech stack, or what a tech stack is, in the past, but George, do you want to just quickly give us a little definition on that?
On the tech stack of the what, the font size, or I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I know. You got hung up on the Fox line back there.
Yeah, walking around.
What I was
I
saying,
think he's counting our awards, actually, no, just
Exactly.
we use. I was saying that if you, as I was asking if you could define the text, what a text stack means. Sorry.
A text or tech stack.
Okay, thank you, George. So what we're going to do is, given that you can't always guarantee what's going to be on the client side when they're viewing a website, we create what we call a font stack, and that allows us to fall back to different kinds of fonts. They're ordered as a stack. So
100%. Yes, you define it, and each one is installed, and then there's pieces. There's default fonts that will default in case that font is not available to use, and that's one of the big advantages if you use something like an embedded document, like a PDF. Because the font is already pre-embedded into the document at a PostScript level, so that it's not going to be changing based on opening the file. It always looks the same no matter what you do with it. It's pretty immutable.
Well, that's the beauty of a PDF, is that, I mean, the P stands for portable, and all the resources needed for accurate rendering are included in the file. That's not always what happens with the web. Often we will use fonts that exist on a computer, or thankfully, probably for at least the past decade, we use web-based fonts that get delivered over web. And that eliminates a lot of the problems that you'd have with a font not loading. But we also use these font stacks to ensure that we have some fallbacks. So if you look at the bottom of the screen that I'm sharing right now, you'll see the word font family followed by a handful of different fonts. So there's Poppins, which is what we use and what's being displayed on screen right now.
Right.
And if that was not available, the browser would attempt to use Helvetica New, which is just one of the fonts I've got licensed here on my machine. And I probably put it in there for testing purposes. If that's not around, it will try a default Helvetica, which is installed on the majority of machines these days. And as an absolute last resort, it will just default to whatever the default sans serif font on that machine is.
Which is generally Arial on most machines?
Yeah, it's usually Arial on them. I think that's changed a little bit over the years. I think that Microsoft has changed their default font. Tahoma was one, I think, that was like what, Windows XP or something like that.
Calibri.
Calibri, yes.
So that's the one you'll see a lot for a lot of Windows machines.
So that's most likely what will be shown. It's not something I've actually looked to see what would happen, because I don't let it happen. we use web-based fonts that get delivered through Google Fonts to make sure that the resources are available when the pages are being rendered. So we have the fallback in place, but don't really worry about it all that much. That's really it when it comes to fonts for the web in a basic sense. There are a lot more complex things that we could talk about, but I think that this just kind of shines a little bit of light on how much variation can exist with just a few settings being put in place. And, using the right selection is how you create text that's readable, that's easily ingested, and honestly, it reflects the personality of whatever it is that you're doing. I see
Right.
Poppins. I think with at least within the context of IT and IT services, I think Valiant, and it's interesting because a lot of other people too these days too. You know, the communities that I'm a part of, and other marketing folks at MSPs, when they see this font, they think of us, and
Right.
not intentional, but I think that that's a sign of, like, pretty decent execution of how we use it.
Well, it's consistent, right? It's consistently applied, and that's one of the big things with font, and then your kind of familial look of your brand,
Overall visual style and
visual
the
styling,
language
and right,
used, and there are other elements like icons and flourishes and stuff that go into the work as well. I mean, even we're looking at our screen right now, we could see the little hexagon treatment behind it. That's a
it's right.
very large part
Very
of
cool.
what we consider to be our visual language, and it's got meaning to us.
Yeah.
Yep.
That meaning isn't necessarily understood by everyone. It's not something that gets advertised that much because it's not as important as the services that we actually do provide to people. But there's reason for it, and I think any business that has that is doing something pretty well. You know, really thinking out not just what they're offering as services, but how they're presenting themselves. And that plays a very critical role in growing business and having awesome salespeople make awesome sales.
That's right.
Talking about you guys.
I'm gonna point at George. Was trying.
I was trying to point, and then I got to get the screen reversal thing. It's too much. So, George, how about we get some final words from you this Friday before we call it?
Yeah.
Thursday. We call it a week.
So yeah, I think once again this like it was great taking a little break away from the cybersecurity operational work that we know there. We're gonna go back to it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's really great because there's just working with so many different marketing communications firms and design folks. This stuff really matters in a way that you may not at first blush realize it. It's one of the cool parts of our job is sometimes we get to work with customers and see the process in which they use fonts and design the elements of the environment for their customers, and see these massive kind of like works in progresses on boards and mood boards and progress boards, and it's really interesting stuff. And you don't really appreciate it, much like a lot of things in life. You don't really appreciate the amount of thought and process that went in. You can pretty geek out pretty hard on this.
Yeah.
If you go down a rabbit hole, it's its own. It really is its own universe. Like it's its own world, like anything else. Much like the things that maybe more resonating with us, which is like cybersecurity or operational resilience and that sort of thing. So I think I think is really great. I think the more managed this is for companies, better the outcome is. Like if you don't set the font for what it's supposed to be, people don't know what to use, and so they'll start using Comic Sans.
Yeah, I mean, like even back in, I guess it was 2017 when we did a bit of a brand refresh, and Poppins was something that was selected. And I think this happens almost any company. There was a little bit of a struggle to get people to like really realize what needed to be done, and we had to, make sure that there were templates sent out. And our lovely service team, and I mean that wholeheartedly. That sounded a little satirical for me for a second, but they worked with me to make sure that we deployed all of the proper fonts to the machines, and just took all the steps that we needed to take to make sure that everything was there and ready to be used. And I very rarely see anything within our walls that isn't in Poppins, that isn't within one of the templates that we've designed for that consistency that you're talking about. And that's a really good feeling, because that's not always easy to achieve within a business.
It's not something you would do. It's not something you would do automatically. I think it has to be mindful, which is difficult.
Yeah, and I think there's something so like even when I first, because I think you'd already started using Poppins by the time I joined Valiant, and even walking into the office, I don't know how you did it, Matt, but I feel like the branding things you created around it matched the kind of how I felt walking into the space.
Well, I mean,
that sounds a little hokey, but like, I don't know, like it's like a complete experience of a company.
I'm going to tell a quick story, and then we can end the stream for the day.
Yeah.
A lot of the office design was coming from George and the other partners of Valiant. If I can find the photos, I unfortunately made our main hallway look like a bag of Skittles exploded. George, do you recall that? I had a purple wall. and a yellow wall, and all these different colors that were from our extended palette. And then I think it was George that walked in and was like, if it's not orange or it's not gray, I just don't want it on the walls. And he was absolutely right. It ended up in being a beautiful office. And also got to give George credit for, and I'm going to share a photo of this next week so people know what we're talking about, but the sticker that goes the length of all of the windows in the main hallway,
Yeah.
that's inspired by race cars. I think that was what the Ford
GT had that as a kind of a classic wide, but it's part of it. It's the idea of them moving forward through the hallway and the lockers. So that
expresses motion. It gets us from point A to point B, and that's a lot of what we do for our customers as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I wanted to make sure that credit goes to where credit's due on that one.
I don't know very much about anything about design, but sometimes you know what you like, and really smart folks, much smarter and much better design. I'll give a shout out to Andrew Kwasny, our office procurement and kind of all around great guy. A lot of the artwork and ideas and stuff that's in this office, carpets and all the pieces were a lot of his
chairs with cow prints on them and everything, right?
Stuff I would never in a million years get. So
it looks good. It looks good. Anyway, enough interior design conversation. It's entirely super off mission for us right now. But so I guess next week we're going to really go into cybersecurity frameworks.
Yep, we're kind of going back to our roots on this one. Next week we have a really exciting episode. It's going to be really kind of diving back into the NIST CSF framework in context of other cybersecurity frameworks. Why pick one? Why you'd want to implement it in your environment, and then from there maintain it. What is one of the pieces that I think is probably the most difficult pieces. It's easy to adapt something. It's easy to say you're doing it, but then to do it for month after month, year after year, and make that continuous improvement. So we're going to talk a lot about that and how to get started, and if you have implemented a program, keep it going, because I think in a small, medium business environment, it's really challenging, and you need to have the buy-in from management, the staff, and from your implementation team. So
I guess in the most simplest terms, it's really us equating cybersecurity resilience and the usage of frameworks to regular diet and exercise and the health benefits that come from it.
I think it's like all diet and exercise conversations. Just pick a diet and pick an exercise program and actually do it, which is the hardest thing because we're humans and consistency is difficult. So
we'll see what we can do about that next Thursday.
Yep.
But until then, I hope everyone has a great week. Enjoy their weekend.
Yes, enjoy Memorial Day. Thank you for always keeping Memorial Day in mind. It's an important holiday, not just the start of summer, by the way.
It's not even the start of summer. It's unofficial.
But
everyone, I hope, enjoys their weekends and gets to spend some time with their loved ones. So until next week, everyone have a good one.
You too. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Megan.
It was good to see you.